Is it recording?
It is recording.
All right, here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I am your host, Brian Snyder, and with me, my co-host and co-pilot through life is former editor-in-chief of Atlas Obscura, co-founder of Odd Salon, death-positive advocate, funeral counselor, and my beloved wife, Rachel Snyder.
Former Facebook lover.
And former Facebook lover. Yes. And so if you like the show, please rate, subscribe, review, and if you don't like it, send it to your opposing political party. You can find us on theblindmaninblack.com, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. And once again, continuing the conversation with deprofessionalized intellectual, activist, author, and my dear friend and mentor, Gustavo Esteva. Thank you for being here.
Hi,
are you there?
Brian. Hi, Rachel. Good to see you both. Yes.
It's lovely to hear your voice. I'm really excited because I know you have a lot. Well, I'll say this. I'm excited and anxious. I almost had an anxiety attack before we started trying to set up because I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's the subject matter. It may be what's going on in the world, but we are going to talk about the art of dying, which both Gustavo and Rachel have an enormous amount of experience, I guess, experiencing in various ways. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, it is difficult to describe, but at least in my case, I am convinced that the art of dying is dying. And then I have been for many, many years trying to struggle to keep it alive. I think that the art of dying is the central component, the most important component of the art of living. And then destroying the art of dying is really a very serious matter. And it is happening, and the pandemics has showed the extremes of this terrible, terrible condition, terrible situation, unbearable situation for many, many people. It's a perfect example of the horror that we all are living with the current system. We lost the capacity to die our own death. That is very serious matter, Brian. It's no longer in our hands. Let's say something. The art of it's a very old art. The art of dying has accompanied all cultures for millennia. Many different cultures have done different kind of things, but the process of destruction of this art of dying, and that is basically associated with capitalism and the way that capitalism has the medicalization of life by capitalism is what has destroyed this capacity.
Now, before we get into actually what the art of dying is, Rachel, why don't you talk from the point of view of a death positive advocate and discuss like how dying is viewed within our own land, the United States of America, and what you are trying to do?
Well, with Gustavo, I mean, I wasn't sure what this conversation would be about exactly, because the art of dying means a lot of things. You know, it means very personal things and then this very broad idea of things. And now that he's spoken, I know which direction, you know, what we're talking about. And it's very in tune with my work, which is that in the US, we always took care of our dead. I mean, that's what people died at home and families did everything. And then during the Civil War, they were having to travel, take the bodies home to such long distances. And obviously that was not going well. You know, there's trains, they're going by train and weeks. And then that was, the bodies were not arriving in a, viewable or in any way, touchable way. And so that's when they invented embalming. And embalming turned into something that slowly got capitalized on as something that someone else had to do. So they started embalming and to send the bodies back, and then then that became someone's job. And then that person decided to do this job too. So it was the people who were doing the grave digging and the headstone creating. And then they said, oh, well, we'll do the embalming too. And we'll also deliver the bodies and we'll also do this. And you don't have to do anything. And they slowly just kind of made from a not very respectable position, they created a position that eventually through history started to be seen as almost a medical thing, where they started to tell people that you had to do these things. You couldn't do this yourself, and that you could get sick from the bodies, and that a professional had to take over. And they kind of wiggled their way into an almost medical, position that is not valid. It's kind of a con. That was also sold along with the religious idea that if you were preserved, you would arrive in heaven preserved, and there would be no breakdown of the body, which is not true. No matter what you do, that is inevitable. It can be staved off for a while, but not forever. So you have these religious constructs, and then this money involved, and it becomes an industry. And that industry is not a necessary industry. Now that we've got codes and laws and things that we have to do, it's almost impossible for a family to do everything that they're on their own, but you can still do most of it on your own. And the work that I've been involved in, both even when I was working at the funeral home, and kind of on enemy lines, and so to speak, is to learn about more about it from a hands-on experience, and give families that option to have their loved ones die at home, to be involved in the process, to dress the body, to clean the body, to do everything. And we've had a few families that, with the right knowledge and guidance, do exactly that, do everything except for file permits and have control over the whole situation. And it's a multi-million-dollar industry, obviously, but that it's not one that we need. And in my experience, and this was a surprise to me, was the way that the families, the way that their grief was so much easier, not easier, it's a hard word to find. It was so much more personal. They felt connected, and they felt like they were serving their loved ones, as opposed to just being hands off and it being this dark, unspoken, creepy thing that they can't do, So my work is involved around encouraging families to be more hands-on and to kind of destroy the industry from the inside, essentially.
And also embalming itself is very toxic. Like it's carcinogenic, right?
Yeah, it's very toxic. The chemicals are awful, and like I said, it doesn't preserve forever. Nothing can. It does make for a very much more acceptable looking corpse, a beautiful corpse for sure. But that's for viewings and things like that, if you're going to keep, but they did that before without the preservatives. There's natural ways to preserve for time, not for weeks and weeks like embalming, but really doesn't need to go on for that long.
And then the other thing is a lot of where the money is made in the caskets, excuse me.
The vast majority of the money is in the casket companies, that there's a bit of a monopoly, and it's exorbitant. And in 1984, they passed a law, a funeral law, that protected consumers from a lot of really shady stuff that the casket companies and the funeral homes were to some extent. But
that took a long time. 1984 is not that long ago.
Well, again, they made it a taboo subject where people stopped knowing anything about death. They stopped being involved in it. They stopped seeing it. They stopped experiencing it, with other people. So when you have something so taboo that no one wants to talk about, you can say whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. And you can charge whatever you want for it. If you convince people that it's dirty and you can get sick and that it's gross and that it's awful, and we'll just take care of it, and here's your bill, it's easy to do. So the casket companies, especially, they're selling things with gaskets and all these fancy doodads that are basically promising eternal preservation, because people don't want to think about decomposing, but they can't do that. So the law, that stuff has to be in the paperwork. It says there is no way to preserve a body forever. You cannot, so consumers are somewhat protected now, but the stigma and the taboo is still pretty firmly in place. So even if people know this stuff, they still don't want to do it. They still don't want to, they just want to pay and have it done.
And speaking of paying, So the cheapest, roughly in this area at least, is what? What is just for cremation and that's it in a box? You're out the door. Is like what, $1,300?
It's different all over, but generally around here it's for a cremation with nothing, no bells or whistles. It's $2,000, and that's just for a cardboard box and a cremation and a plastic container that you get handed. Right. For a funeral, that if you had no funeral at all and just for a casket and a burial, it's more like five to six, and that's for the absolute cardboard casket, burial, no service, no nothing. And so the average funeral where you actually have a service and you actually have a metal casket you're in the $10,000 range easily. I mean, 10,000 and up.
So that addresses the capitalistic aspect of it. Now, Gustavo, talk about what the art of dying means to you.
Yep. Because of course, first of all, I think what Rachel is doing is really great. It is really needed. Part of this is because the people don't want to save money in the case of burying their loved ones. They're ready whatever amount are asked because they don't want to be saving the money, not being generous with the loved ones, and that is used by the industry to abuse the people.
Yes,
because of the attitude of the people, and you can understand that you really want to you love your loved ones, and then when they died, you want to do the best you can for them, and then that is really used and abused by the industry against them. But that happened when already the art of dying was already dying. The first point that I want to say is that first, the fact of dying is the only fact that we know for sure in our life. Then to recognize that we will die, all of us, is just to be humans, it's just to accept who we are. It's not something special, it's something anomalous. It is just acknowledging that this is the only thing that we have for sure. We don't know anything about what will happen with us in any aspect of our lives, but we know for sure that we will die. And that
besides birth, it's the only other universal experience we have. Birth and death is the only things that we all have.
Yes, absolutely. And it can happen at any moment. No one has any kind of certificate or guarantee that will live certain amount of years. People can die a few days after being born, or a few months or years or whatever, at any moment for different reasons. There are very serious scientific hypotheses saying that the day of our death is scheduled in the heart. That in our heart, the day we are born, there is a program established for the day of our death. 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. It is there. I can give you later the books about this. Very, very serious studies. This guy performed 100,000 how do you say the operation after
autopsies?
Autopsies, just studying what happened with the people in the whole world after presenting their hypothesis. It's Mehta and Kotari, the authors, and they did very, very serious studies about this. And then, but it is just a hypothesis. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps every one of us, and then we cannot stand that time. And the question in their vision of the world is how you live the period of time in which you are living. You can live well, or you can be in horrible and terrible conditions, but you will die anyway in a certain time, in a certain moment. But let me talk. But we are talking. Let me talk a little different. Of course, we have a different context, but yes, I want, perhaps the best way to talk about the art of dying is to talk about my grandmother. Perhaps you have heard this story once, Brian. Sorry if I am repeating myself,
That's
but
all right.
my grandmother, when she was a fantastic woman. When she was 95 years old, she loved fiestas. She had her 5 daughters in different cities of Mexico. And then she was traveling alone by bus to visit her daughters, to stay with every daughter for a few months. She did not have a house. She was living in the house of her daughters for, she lived there for 60 years in different houses of her daughters. And then one year, when she was 95 years old, she loved the fiestas. She went to every fiesta. And she started to say that year, this is my last marriage. This is my last baptism. This is my last Christmas. Every one of the fiestas of the family. She was saying, this is the last one. But it was not to present any kind of claim, but just because it was the last, she should enjoy it the most possible way. And she was very animated and dancing and doing everything to enjoy really the last Christmas or the last opportunity to have to be with the family in these fiestas. And then when the whole cycle of fiestas ended, and then she cooked a great dinner in my mother's house where she was staying in that moment in Mexico City. She invited 2 other daughters that were all in that moment in Mexico City, and her favorite grandsons and granddaughters. I was one of them. And then she offered us that dinner. At the end, she gave us a very special kiss, and then she went to bed to sleep. And then she slept and died at dawn. And then it is very clear that at one point when she was 95 years old, she came to the conclusion, this is it, this is the end of my life. I have had a very fruitful life, a full life. This is the time to go. And then she organized the goodbye for a whole year, saying goodbye to every member of the family, being in the fiestas, enjoying life for the last time, and then died a peaceful death, died her own death. When the time came, she died. That is really mastering the art of dying. She lived and she died in the proper way. She died her own death. I want to add something. When we were having her in my home, in the best room, my mother and my sister was praying, and then the rest of the family started to come. And then when one daughter from the state of Guerrero, Maria Luisa, my aunt Maria Luisa, came, she started to cry from the taxi in the street. Oh, my mother, why you left you? Please take you with me. I must be with you. You must not have abandoned us. She started to cry desperate. And then she cried, she embraced my grandmother. And then she was next to the corpse and embracing and saying things and very excited and crying and praying. And then the next day we buried her, and then we were in the same room. And for a long time, it was the first time in which the whole family was together. And we started to talk. And we started to talk about stories about my grandmother. And we started to laugh like mad. And we were really enjoying ourselves talking about my grandmother and laughing and saying things, etc. And then at 7 o'clock, they started to pray. And then again, my Aunt Maria Luisa started to cry. It was possible to express all the emotions at the same time in that place. It was not serious. It was not pretending that you were all right. You were expressing yourself. laughing or whatever was coming to your heart. That is again part of the art of dying. It is, and this is a tradition that we are still enjoying in Mexico. When you are at home with the died, the person that died, they bring the music the person that died loved. They start to to tell the jokes that he or she loved, and to laugh with him, with the person that is already dead. It's already there, and then it is not a serious. It's painful but joyful at the same time.
I remember when I was visiting Teotitlan de Valle and in Dia de los Muertos.
Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, and I remember going to the cemeteries, and it was so beautiful. Like, I remember seeing all the candles, and everybody was around the grave of their loved ones, and they were laughing and drinking, and there was music. It was one of the most joyful, beautiful experiences I've ever seen.
It is. We still have these celebrations. We were celebrating in my home years ago when I came to San Pablo Etla. And in the Day of the Dead, they organize a kind of masquerade. There is a group of young men that some of them are dressed as women, and then they represent many things. They do jokes and of everything, but basically they represent something. And then in the representation, there is a moment that there is a guy that is dying, that is very, very bad, in very bad condition. He's almost dying. And then they bring the doctor cannot do anything. Then they bring the priest to give him the orders. The novia of the guy is around crying because this guy is dying. And then a friend of the guy start to talk with a very old and drunk guy that is around. And they talk for a while, and then after that, the dead is around dancing, around ready to capture the body of the guy. And then after this discussion with the drunk old guy, the friend goes with the dead and tell them about the arrangement. And then the dead accept the and then the dead goes with the old guy and abandon the place. And then the guy get up immediately, and you have the marriage and the dancing and everything. Everyone celebrates. There is a celebration because there was an arrangement and a different person died, not the one. But the whole thing, it's a celebration, and it is also the assumption in the Day of the Dead. Every house has an altar, and in the altar you have the photos of the loved ones that died in recent years, and you put in the altar all the food and drinks that they loved, assuming that during the night they will come and drink and eat what they loved. There is a kind of familiarity with the dead. So there is a conversation with the dead. There is not something beyond your life. It's part of your life to talk with the dead.
You know,
celebrate the dead.
The Mexican culture is one of my favorite death cultures because of that, but also because they keep, they say that that you're alive as long as people who love you are and are talking about you and are thinking of you, right? So you live as long as everyone who loves you is, you still exist as long as they do. And the Mexican culture is very good about, always remembering and talking about people, where our culture is very, sometimes the name is verboten, never again to be spoken. And that's so sad to me. I love that. I think one of the most beautiful, the first very beautiful thing I saw while working at the mortuary was a Mexican funeral where there's a very young, beautiful woman who's killed in a murder-suicide. It was very sad death. And obviously she had young children. I mean, it was very tragic, but her friends came in and they said, we're going to do her makeup and we're going to do her hair because we knew how she liked it best. And they had never done anything like it. They had never even seen a dead body before, but they came in with the curling irons and the makeup and they did everything on their own. It was, a little guidance because it's a little different. But other than that, they were fine, and they laughed and they talked and they joked while they did it, and they cried and but they really connected and with her, and they made her look exactly how she would have wanted to. And the funeral was huge and beautiful, and there was wailing and laughing and drinking and eating and crying, and it was very much a party and very much a she was very much a part of it. There was no avoiding the body, and everyone was surrounding her. And that was actually Brian, was the woman who you saw.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
So Brian came to help me clean up afterwards, and she was still in the chapel, and he asked if he could go see her, and I said, of course you can. She's she's out for that reason. And it was nighttime at that point. The funeral was during the day, but the night had come, and there was a veil over the casket, and the lighting was designed to be very beautiful. And since there was no light coming from outside, it was even more. It was a very beautiful scene. And Brian, it was one of the last things he saw.
Yeah, it was that will be the last dead person that I will actually see. So
and I walked by. He was alone in the chapel with her, and I kind of walked by while I was vacuuming or something. I looked down, and it was just a very beautiful scene to see this casket with this beautiful veil coming down and light just on them. And Brian was kind of gazing at her. No, it was nice. He's like, it was nice that was what he saw, because obviously it's not always like that. And but that was a very memorable service and person. At this point, I've had over 600 people go through my hands, and I don't remember all of them. I thought that I would. I think in the beginning I said I will remember every single one of these people, but I don't. So I remember about 20 very specifically, and that she was very much one of them, and a lot of it had to do with the experience with watching Brian see her and have that experience.
Rachel, let me ask you, in relation to Gustavo's experience, is there an experience that when he was talking reminded you of something that you have experienced?
You just mean with someone accepting and kind of announcing?
Or it could be the opposite.
Well, I mean, usually people, for me, usually people are already there when I come upon them. I've only been with a couple of dying people.
You've seen a lot of tragic death, though.
I've witnessed a lot of death as a bystander. Yeah. I've seen on the street. I've seen a couple of people die, and I've found a couple of people, loved ones of mine, after the fact. But to date, I have only been with two people as they died, and watched that process. One was my father, and one was a very close friend recently. And those two experiences were very different, even though the two men were very similar in life, and close friends too. They were friends. They had similar personalities and dispositions. And one of them, my father, went out fighting. The whole thing was a fight. Everything about it was a fight. And it was difficult to watch, and it was painful. And with the friend, it was not like that, surprisingly, because I thought it would be. I assumed it would be, because he fought, his whole life was a fight. But there was a level of acceptance in the second instance, where he came to terms with it, and he was given, I think there was a major issue in his life that caused him a lot of sadness that was resolved in those last few weeks. And I think that resolution allowed him to accept what was happening. And his death was beautiful. It was beautiful and peaceful and calm. But I do agree with Gustavo. There does seem to be, I've definitely noticed that people do have a choice to decide exactly when. People wait for certain things, like your time is your time within a window. But I've witnessed many people wait until a certain loved one showed up, or wait until a certain loved one left, or wait until they're alone, or just whatever. Unless unless that's just the imagination conjuring up a metaphorical thing, like, well, that's perfect it seems very much so like there is definitely a choice to let go at when the conditions are right. A lot of people die right after Christmas or right after their birthday. I noticed a pattern in that when I was doing death certificates, that so many people died the day after their birthday. So many, like an unusual amount of them. And it just seems like it can't be a coincidence, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And you also, I mean, with your friend, you also help guide him, you know, in the art of dying, because I think that was one of the things is he was not accepting it, right, to some degree in the beginning.
He was very involved with my project, with my death project. He was very fascinated with the topic. He did all the artwork for my work, and it was something we talked about frequently. He also was not completely wanting to be here, and he died in a way that was self-inflicted, a slow but definitely avoidable and self-inflicted way. And when he got sick, he died of liver failure. He was not, yeah, he wasn't, I was called in as someone that was most trusted to him, that could be the one to say, you're dying, so let's, you know, because he wouldn't go to the hospital, he wouldn't get any care, he wouldn't, he was fighting basically. And so his caregiver and partner asked me to come, and I did. And I think he knew why I was there. You know, we had been we'd been friends for 30 years. We had a fight a couple of years previous, and we had not been speaking for a minute. And so this was the first time I'd seen him previous of this fight that we had gotten into, and it had been 2 years. And there was no surprise or anything, you know, he knew I was there. And his partner asked me to tell him that he was dying bluntly because no one else would, and he wasn't picking up the hints really. But I mean, he must have known, you know. I don't think he didn't know. I just think the box needed to be opened badly for a lot of reasons, and someone needed to open it, and he wasn't doing it. So I chickened out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it in person. I sat with him, and I got up, you know, it just was too difficult. So I wrote him a letter, a very long letter. And in it, I said, I don't know if you know, or if you just don't, you know, but you are dying. And this is, you know, and that's, I don't remember exactly what I said, but, you know, the point was that, yes, I was the one who told him directly, because, you know, the doctors were winding around it and not really saying it out loud, because no one wants to say that. No one wants to look at someone and say, you're dying. That's happening right now. Like there's no going back now. This is happening. And it might be in a couple of weeks, and it might be tomorrow, but there's no maybe about it. So after we had that conversation, he opened up about that and how he felt about it, and what he wanted. And I sat with him for, you know, as you know, 3 months through COVID, which was very difficult because, you know, I was always so concerned about getting sick or getting him sick, and wasn't supposed to be around anybody, and working at the mortuary, I was constantly exposed. So it was a very stressful time. But there was a day very soon before he passed where he said, out of the blue, because we often didn't talk about that as much, we just talked about old memories and, you know, funny stories. And he said it kind of abruptly, don't let them embalm me. I don't want to be embalmed. I don't want to be buried. And I said, you know that they's me, right? I'm they. I'm unless you don't want that, but I'm assuming you want it to be me that comes for you at that time, right? And he said, oh, good. I was hoping that would be the case. I said, well, why would I let anyone else? You know, of course it'll be me. Of course I'll come. And he said, you promise you can do that? And I said, I won't like it, but yeah, of course I will do it. It'll be an honor to do it. And he said, will you stay with me the whole time? And I said, of course I will. But I meant after the death. I was not, after watching my father die, which was very traumatic and very, you know, he didn't want to go, and he fought it, and it was awful. It was very difficult to watch and to be a part of, and to know that I was what was keeping him attached, and that I was what was making him suffer and not letting go. And so because of their knowledge of each other and their similarities, and you know, I was expecting it to be a similar scenario. So I asked the partner to not be there for that part, and that I would just come when it was time. But I ended up getting a call in the middle of the night. She was very scared. She'd never see, we don't prepare anybody for what death involves. We don't tell them what to expect or what will happen. And so she called at 3 a.m, terrified because he had started to rattle, and she'd never heard that sound, and she was scared, and she was alone. And so, as you know, fine, I'll go, because I had to, because she was scared, and I knew how that felt, and I couldn't leave her be. So I went, and it ended up being a beautiful, beautiful day and a beautiful death. And he went very peacefully, and it was just the perfect people to be there were there. And it was quiet, and it was sunny, and it had been during a storm. So it was a beautiful, unusual, the sun had come out. And then I went home, and then they dressed the body, and his ex-wife came, and his sons came, they dressed the body, they put coins on his eyes, they played music. They did a full day of viewing at home through Zoom because of COVID. And I came back when they were ready for me to take him. And that whole experience, coming back later when the rain was back, and feeling very much like an angel of death, kind of, coming back to this place, to this person that I'd been so close to for so long, and watching, the bag be zipped and carried out into the rain, and the rain is falling off the bag in a way that I had seen fall off of his backpack a million times over the years. And, it was just a beautiful, but very surreal experience. But when I watched my father die, I remember thinking, they lied. You don't go peacefully. You gasp for air, and you fight, and you choke, and it lasts so long. And they don't tell you this. And I thought that's how you died. And then I watched Day die, and it was so peaceful and so beautiful. And I was so relieved to know that it could be that way, but also very, very sad to know that, because then I realized it didn't have to be that way for my father. And I don't know what the difference was, because they both had pretty much the same amount of time to accept it and to think about it, but my father just didn't want to go, and Damien did. And I think that's the big difference, is Damien accepted it and wanted it to some extent, and my father did not want it at all. And he did not go peacefully, and he went as he lived, kicking and choking and angry and fighting and fighting and fighting. But I will say this about my father: he didn't want to leave me or my sons. He was very devoted to us, and he was very worried that we would not be okay if he was gone. And as he was dying, I started to sing to him, because he was a musician, and we always sang together, and he taught me to sing, and I thought it would bring him comfort. And it didn't seem to be doing that. He kept trying to look at me, and he kept, struggling. And at some point I ran out of things to sing, and I didn't know what to do, because it was taking a very long time. I'd gone through 3 songs, and I had nothing left, and I had only planned for 2. And so I ran, and I got my iPad, and I played a song that he had been playing by the Beach Boys, that he'd been playing for about 6 months on repeat. And it was a very beautiful song about summer ending and everyone going away, and and so I put it by his head, and I just stopped talking, and I stopped interacting with him. And the minute it turned on, his face was awash with peace, and his eyes closed, and his last breath was out before before it finished the first part of the song. And I realized in that moment that we have to give dying people space to let go. We have to, we can't make it about ourselves and try to comfort them and remind them how much we love them over and over again while they're trying to let go of us. It's not what they need. They need space to be alone, and to, even if you're there, be alone in themselves and detach from us, or they can't go easily. So that was a hard lesson to learn in that situation, but I learned it. And it's very, these are the things that our culture has no idea of, because we don't talk about it, and we won't allow people to do it. We won't allow people to be there, or ourselves to be there, because we feel we can't do it. But as you know, as I say, the most loving thing you can do for anyone is to watch them die. That is love, is being able to do that. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Forrest. That was definitely that's all I have to say about that. Yeah. So Gustavo, rebuttal.
No, it is. Well, the main question is that we have been formatted to fight against death, and that is terrible. That is really to prolong the life one way or the other, and to fight against death. You remember the Hippocratic oath. The main oath was, when the doctor knows that the person is dying, he must go. He has no longer any function there because the person is dying and the doctor knows that. What happened today is exactly the opposite. When a person is in the process of dying, and the doctors, the medical profession takes control of the person and transform the event in a fight. Every death is a failure, is assumed as a failure. And then they need to fight to the end with the incredible suffering for the people. I have a very close friend who was forced to fight legally for the doctors in the Social Security let her daughter die. The daughter was born with all kind of very serious problem. The best hope she had was to live 4 or 5 years in the hospital. In the first 6 months, she suffered 15 surgeries without any hope. It is the doctors had the obligations to do something if something can be done. Then even can have legal obligation. And when he was asking the doctor, please give my daughter back to me. I want to be with my daughter and let her die. They refused it. And then he was forced to use the law to get the possibility of her poor daughter dying. Her poor daughter.
And it's very difficult to do legally because there's many gray areas where religion can come into play, or like you can have paperwork that says you do not want to be artificially preserved, kept alive, but they can go against that paperwork on religious, for religious reasons. If it's a Catholic hospital, they don't have to obey that paperwork. And they won't. If they don't want to, they won't. And emergency personnel, they are not required to pay attention to a do not resuscitate. Their job is to get you alive long enough to get you to the hospital so they can see. You could tattoo it on your chest. They can still do it and not be held accountable.
In the pandemic, they take control of the people against the will of the people and the family. We have very concrete cases, stories, horrible stories. A guy, 98 years old, telling the nurses in the hospital, I want to die. I am ready. And it's not that I am ready to die. I want to die. I really want to die, but I want to die with my family. I want to see for the last time my daughter and my granddaughter. Please let me go. And he was not allowed to go. He died alone in a room in the hospital. And this has happened. That is why many people now in Mexico don't go to the hospitals in the case of COVID. First, because they have a high rate of lethality, and they are saying, the rumor is that they are killing the people in the hospitals. But the fact is that they don't want to be in that situation of losing control, and they can no longer see the families. They are alone in the rooms and they can see them by in virtual way. They cannot see them in person. And people don't want to accept that. That is why they are refusing to go to the hospital, because they want to have the relation with the people and the families. They want to die their own death, not to die a medicalized death controlled by the doctors. There is one story by Brillat Savarin, the poet and author in the early 19th century, that he was staying with her aunt, a very old, a woman of 96 years old, in very good condition. but in the last part of the life, she was just eating less and being very tired, but still in good condition. And then one day, Briat Savarin saw her very sad, and then she brought to her his best wine, and he gave her a glass of wine, of this very good wine. And then she was immediately animated, and she started to talk. And at one point, she told Brigitte Savarin, you know, son, you will understand one of these days that there is the conditions, there are moments in which we need dying as much as we need sleeping or eating. That there is a moment in which we really need to die. And she died very happy 2 hours later. That is the art of dying again. That is to know that that there is a moment you want to die, you are ready to die, and because the moment has arrived, and then you die peacefully, and you went. But many people do different things. They want to talk with the loved ones, or they don't want to talk with the loved ones. They want to be isolated. They want to be with others. There are many different kind of reactions. But the point is, are you living your life? One friend told me some time ago, I think it's not always the case, but the people are afraid of death, not really with fear of death, but fear of not having lived. And they want to prolong the life with a fantastic hope and illusion that something will happen that will give meaning to a life that had no meaning. And they are hoping that and that and that. And I have seen this in several persons that are really trying to do anything to keep them alive, hoping that something will happen because the life had no meaning. And I think that the art of dying is discovering the meaning of your life. That is the main consequence of the art of dying. You find the meaning of your life, and then once you have a life with a meaning, you can die.
Mhm.
because
in the situation with the friend that just passed, and he just passed this year, so it was very fresh. One of the conversations we had, the reason I was brought in is because he was in tremendous pain, and his partner and caregiver wanted me to convince him to go to the hospital, to be, given comfort. And I went in with that goal because I'm conditioned just like everyone else to think, and it's taking undoing, so much undoing to understand, that these are not the right ways. So I came and then I called 911 and I tried to force him into the hospital essentially, and it didn't work because he was still of sound mind and he refused. And I came back, which was an uncomfortable conversation when I came back, because obviously I'd betrayed him. I had, and I told him I would. In the letter I wrote, I said, I will betray you because I will do what I think is best for you. And I came the next day and I had thought about it. And I thought, I said, I apologize. This is not my decision. And I shouldn't have tried to take that away from you. And you're right. I want you to be where you want to be. And he said, I'm not angry, but do you think if I go into the hospital that I'll ever come out? And I said, no. And he said, why would I want to be there then? Why would I want to go there and be alone and be there? I will never come out. And I may not live any longer here, but at least I'll be here. And that was a very teaching moment for me as well. It's like, I had this idea that he needed to be comfortable, and he didn't want to be. He didn't want to be out of pain and there. He wanted to be in pain and at home where he was. And it was not my decision to make. And that was a big change in my advocacy as well, and the way that I handle it in general. But one thing that I wanted to mention about what you said, Gustavo, is that hospice nurses have been asked over and over again what people say they regret the most when they're on their deathbed. And there is overwhelmingly, they say, that people talk about the things they regret not doing, not what they did. So there's nothing bad that they've done that they regret. All of the regrets are surrounded about that woman they didn't tell that they loved, or that trip they didn't take, or that job they turned down, or that adventure that they said no to. It was always the things that they didn't do, as opposed to the things that they did that may have been mistakes. And I think that's very, if you live your life being afraid to do things and saying, no, 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 that's what's going to haunt you and keep it and make it difficult to go. It's not going to be the things that you screwed up or the bad decisions that you made. It's going to be the fact that you lived and did all the things regardless of how they would turn out necessarily. And it's the people who didn't live that fight the most and have the hardest time.
Let's talk a little bit about the little deaths in life. From my own perspective, one of the things that I've been dealing with recently is, my eyes are dying. And what I know happens is when I fight against it and try to resist it, I'm in a lot of pain and anxiety. However, what I've been doing more recently has been closing my eyes and accepting it more, and it's been bringing me relief. And I think it's because I'm accepting the death of my eyes to some degree. Now, you have also experienced this, Rachel, with cancer.
Yeah.
Because
well,
no, what I mean is that the whole idea is it's a very American type thing, is when we have an illness, we have to fight it, like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood,
Right.
And
well,
it's
with cancer, I take a lot of umbrage with the language, the fight and the lost her battle, and the language that surrounds cancer, as if you have any control, or it has anything to do with your strength or your will, or your ability to fight off something. You don't. Cancer is giant and looming and bigger than you. It's not. You can fight, but it doesn't have any effect. You have to just, when you're ill like that, and you're possibly going to die from it, and you were healthy, so recently you were fine, and then all of a sudden this thing comes upon you, and it could take you at any moment, and it's so much bigger than you, and people say you have to fight. It's demoralizing, and it's hard because you can't, and people don't want to hear that. You can't say I can't fight. Of course you can. You have to. And it's pushing people to feel badly about the fact that they know they can't do something, and someone is telling them that they're just not trying hard enough, when that's not the case. The case is you just cross your fingers and close your eyes and follow your intuition and hope that it lets go of you, because it's, cancer, I see it very much metaphorically, as especially since it took my father so soon after my own struggle with it, it's like this giant beast that just takes what it wants, and it's like a wildfire. It hops from house to house. It skips people over for no reason. It just takes who it wants to take, and all you can do is just hope it jumps your house. Just hope it lets go of you, and you see other people being taken left and right as you all run away from it. But there's no fighting it. There's just praying it doesn't hit you, praying it jumps over you, praying it doesn't notice you, and then waiting for it to come back, and knowing it could at any point do whatever it wants. And so, yeah, I've taken a lot of I've tried very hard to, in my work, change that language as well, because people who die of cancer didn't lose a battle at all. They didn't lose anything. It was their time, and cancer chose them, and there was nothing they could do except for just accept it and make it what it, the beautiful thing about cancer is that it usually gives you time. And that's something I used to be afraid of, that I didn't want to get sick and be ill and linger. I want to just be hit by a bus and be done, but I don't want that anymore. I want that time to process and to say what I need to say and do the things I need to do. Although I do that anyway, because I know I can get hit by a bus. But, I want that special time to write letters to my children and to go to the parties and say, this is my last party. Like, I want to be able to have that chance to be in it and be a part of it. But yeah, I don't like that language at all. It's very, hopeless and help, to someone who is helpless against what they're dealing with, to tell them that they need to work harder. It's not fair. And it's part of the whole hospital thing that Gustavo is talking about, this like at all costs, you have to fight this thing that's happening. It's going to happen eventually, no matter what. So it can be long and torturous and painful and upsetting for everyone involved completely. Or it can be on your own terms and you can control it. You can control so much more of your death than people realize. Everything from the physical and mental aspects to the financial thing, to everything you can control. You can take control of your own death right now just by getting paperwork set up and telling people what you want and putting that in place so that when it's time, no one has to guess or take over. It's just already there. And that's what a lot of my work is around, is getting people to pre-plan, and not so much in a financial way, but in a mental way and an emotional way, and make sure that everyone knows what to do and what you need ahead of time before they're trying to figure it out and messing it up. I think about that when my father's death. Like, if I had just known he wanted to listen to the Beach Boys, how much easier would that have been for everyone involved? Like, if I had just known that singing to him wouldn't comfort him, that it would tether him to me, that it would keep him attached and if, make him suffer more. I don't blame myself at all, because how would I know that? But I do now. If there was some way that could have been expressed earlier, it would have been helpful. So, the more we talk about it, we just have to talk, because the American culture is so weird about it, and they're so secretive, and even the position of a funeral counselor like myself, just my mere presence is supernatural to people. I'm either an angel that has come to help them, or I am death itself. It's almost as if they feel that I bring death instead of the opposite. Like, death brings me. It invited me. I didn't bring it with me. But people have that, they have a very large fear of those of us who handle the dead, and they get uncomfortable talking about it, very uncomfortable. And the saddest thing is to see someone who's dying get uncomfortable with it, because there's a fear there that can't be good for the soul,
Yeah, and even like you think about it in films and stuff, and I think of the scene in The Big Lebowski where they go to the funeral home and and the guy comes out and he's very stiff, stoic, and he's in a dark suit, and he's like, "Are you the bereaved?" Just very like
Ghoulish.
very ominous, and yeah.
Well, in a way, that's some of that is necessary to a degree, because you need to go in neutrally with people, especially people who are experiencing a lot of fear and a lot of grief. Is you have to go neutrally until I always found the challenge and the joy of that job was to come in neutral and find out what they needed from me. Did they need me to make jokes? Did they need me to be serious? Did they need me to listen? Did they need me to get through it? Like, what did they need exactly, them? And so you go in with that, neutral, very, very malleable personality until you can pick up what it is that they need, and then you can be that for them. And that was a part of the job I very much enjoyed. But people have to feel, that's why politics and all these opinions, they can't come into funeral work, because everyone has to feel comfortable coming to you. Everyone. No one can be worried about you judging them for anything. So you kind of have to take your personality away and put it over here until you realize what is going to make the process for them easiest. And it is my favorite when it's humor, because, oh my gosh, then it's so much better of an experience for everyone. If the family is joking around and they're willing to, to allow, they always apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, that was so, and I'm like, oh, no, we're pretty funny around here. You're in good, and just allow them to do that. I had one woman, I loved her so much. She was so, it was her husband of 30 or 40 years. And she was just absolutely devastated and angry and just very, very negative emotional feelings about it. And she did not, any word that I said that even came close to cremation or death, or like, she just shut down. And it was hard to get her in. And every time I got her in, it would take like 2 hours to get through half of what we needed to do. I was just like pulling teeth to get this woman to be present for the process. And because we spent so much time together, way more than we should have, because she was dragging her feet so much, she started to get comfortable around me. And we were trying to plan the service. And I finally said, what did he like to do? What did he do? Tell me about him. Like, what what did he love? And she said, well, drinking whiskey and gambling. And I said, well, let's do that. Why don't we just do that? And she said, what do you mean? Because she's trying to plan this very stoic Catholic, funeral. And I said, if that's what he'd like to do. She's like, well, we can't gamble in here. I said, as long as you don't use real money, of course you can. You bring chips or yeah, of course you can. You can do whatever you like. I as long as nothing catches on fire and and it's not illegal, of course you can. And then I talked to her about a couple other services where the families did exactly what they wanted to, and she was just astounded that that was even allowed. But it changed her whole attitude about it. Suddenly she was interested and engaged. She said, can I play anything I want? I said, I'll make you a playlist of whatever you want. She said, he liked Johnny Cash. I said, let's put, I will make you a playlist of Johnny Cash and similar things, because she was picking out choir music. She thought she had to do this a certain way. And when she realized she could do it how she wanted to, she was smiling and laughing and hugging me and happy to be, almost happy to be there. I almost had to kick her out at the end of the service. And it just changed. It changed so much for her. And she wrote me a letter later, and so did her daughter, thanking me so much for making the experience that was so horrible so much better. Which, by the way, is the best compliment you can get in the funeral industry, is you made this horrible day so much easier or so much better or fun even sometimes. I think I told you, Brian, about the service where it was karaoke. They brought a karaoke machine. Everyone did karaoke. It was wonderful. And those services, you see the people walking out of them feeling like they got that resolution that they needed, that they have grieved properly, that they said goodbye in a way that was meaningful. You see them wrapping things up how it should be and walking out with their hearts in a good place. And then when you watch the other forced, this is what we're supposed to do. It's supposed to be sad. It has to be dour. It has to be black. It has to be, they're not. They don't walk out with that. They don't walk out laughing and hugging each other and telling jokes and crying together. They walk out alone and silent and not done with the process. So I think that's something that's, and people have no idea here, like in Mexican culture, it's a party and it's a sad party sometimes, but it's also a party and everyone does it together. And it's all about the joy that the person brought in life. Whereas here it's the opposite, and people don't realize that that's just a choice, or it doesn't have to be.
It's fantastic. It's beautiful. It's really, you are doing the right kind of thing in the most difficult conditions because of the context, the cultural context of America.
Yeah, and to have it's people fear even having the discussion. They fear if they talk about death, it'll bring it. It's almost like they can conjure it up just by speaking it, and it's not true. But also in COVID, that has been made so much more difficult because there's so many people dying. And services can't happen, in a lot of instances, and people are not being able to they can't dress the bodies or do that stuff themselves, even if they wanted to, in those situations. I don't think that's a legal thing, but it's definitely a, passed down suggestion. Through COVID, the funeral industry has had very conflicting direction on what to do and what's safe and what should be allowed. And at the funeral home that I was at, it was extremely difficult to tell grieving people they had to, first of all, not come in if possible and do everything by the computer, which didn't work because many of them were seniors who were not, don't have the technological skill to do that. So they'd have to come in and then tell them they have to wear a mask when they're crying and they can't, that it's so difficult to have something on your face when your nose is running and it's just physically difficult to and they're hot, you cry and your face gets hot and it was just too hard. And then also there's almost already so much fear of us. And so if I come to the door like this and I have my most pleasant face on and my most comforting, like, it's okay, you can come in face, it's one thing. If they come in scared and they've been at the hospital and they've already had this experience and I have a surgical mask on, I'm frightening to them. They can't see my face. They can't see my expressions. My expressions are so important when I'm dealing with grieving people, that they can see that I'm listening and that I'm empathizing, and for them to just see this, and this part of my face is reminding them of the medical situation they just experienced. it's very hard to get them to trust me. And if you don't have trust, then it's very hard to work with them. And so it was, and then our rooms are small. I mean, everything we do is designed to be comforting and closed in, and it went exactly against what we're being told to do during COVID. And it was very difficult to not be able to touch people, to not be able to comfort them in the ways that we're used to not allow them to comfort themselves and their families the way that they're, you know, people want to come in, the whole family wants to come in, and we had a 3-person rule where only 3 could come in. So who has to stay outside? Who gets chosen, you know? And we had to be the ones to do that. We had to monitor that. And that was very difficult and not our job, you know, to be policing these families on how they could grieve. And in the meantime, taking the few comforts we give and making them sterile and not being able to give them. I think, and I don't know, Gustavo, if you know, but I left, I'm no longer at the mortuary. I don't work there anymore. In part, a few reasons, but in part, it was because of this past year was so difficult for me. Losing someone of my own during that time, and then also just experiencing not only this disconnect with the families and being unable to help them at what I'm good at, because I'm good at that part, and that's it. That's really the only reason I was a good funeral counselor, is because I could connect with the families and guide them in ways that they got a fulfilling experience. And if I can't do that, I'm just doing paperwork and selling them stuff, and I'm a salesman, and that's not what I wanted to be. So, and then also watching so many people fight against the reality that it's a contagious disease, and all we need to do is kind of stay away from each other and do these small things, and have them intentionally not do that and not protect each other, and then tell me I'm lying when I'm telling them that our funeral home's filling up and then we're running out of room, and they're calling me a liar and saying I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm watching it with my eyes. It made me not feel a lot of compassion for them and not want to, you know, not want to help them. And that was really a horrible feeling, to have that lack of empathy come over me and just be like, fine, die. I don't care, because I do care. But, you know, if they weren't having compassion for anyone else, you know, or it's only seniors, it's only people with conditions. Well, I'm someone with an underlying condition. You know, the people I love the most are all over 70. Like there's no devaluing older people. There's no devaluing people who are already sick. And that's been happening so much, especially here, that it just started to make me very bitter about wanting to serve a community that I didn't think deserved me, really. You know, and so, you know, I've learned, when you start to feel that way, you walk away from that, because you don't want that to seep into your heart and stick. You want it to avoid it.
It's clear. It's clear. I can understand very well.
So Gustavo,
we are just starting to explore that thing. It is really beautiful to hear Rachel and to hear what she had been doing for a long time. And yes, it is in very difficult conditions, but to do the right thing in the right place.
Gustavo, could you get a little bit closer? I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I can hear you. It's just a little soft. But before we disconnect, is there anything else that you would like to say on the art of dying? Also, I have 2 questions for both of you, and I didn't want you to prepare for them. I just wanted to see what your first response was. But first, Gustavo, is there anything else you'd like to add to the art of dying?
Not really. There are too many things, but we need many hours to talk about this. But this is only putting that at our attention on this. We need to talk about this. We need to discuss this kind of things. It is very important. It's central for the art of living to discuss this kind of things as much as possible.
Excellent. Well, what we'll do is we'll continue the conversation. And let me ask you both these 2 questions. One is related to the topic, the other is not. I'll do the unrelated one first. Both of you. So if you were able to speak with everyone on Earth simultaneously at the same time, and they could hear you, everyone on Earth, what would you say to them?
Go ahead, Gustavo.
Enjoy life. Enjoy every minute of life you have with you. You don't know how much you will have this life with you. Then enjoy what you have. Enjoy every morning that you get. You wake up and discover that you are still alive. That is a fantastic joy, a blessing. Enjoy it.
We have to tell that to our son. Rachel.
He does, and he will. He's just sassy.
Rachel?
Well, after I lucked out and the beast let me go, I had a hourglass and the words "Memento Mori" tattooed on my arm to remember that remember you will die, and remember you will die means essentially to remember to live, because any moment it could be done. So just always remember, and I always keep that in the back of my mind. This might be my last day. What am I going to do with it? This may be the last chance I have to do this. How will I do it? Just remember that it's not forever.
That's great. You agree then.
Okay, so my second question, and it can be either done in two forms. So what would your epitaph on your gravestone say? Or if you wanted to do a short eulogy, that's fine as well. So, so what, to keep it simple, if you want to keep it short, what would your epitaph on your gravestone say? Or a short eulogy?
That's a really big question to ask with no time.
That's the whole point.
Carved into your death place for eternity.
That's the whole point.
But make it short, make it concise.
Because the whole point is what comes to your head first. It's not about thinking about it. It's like, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
It was great to be with you.
Are you saying that to end the interview, or?
No. It is forever.
Okay. So that's what's on your gravestone. It was great to be with you.
Yes.
Okay. Rachel?
Mine would be, she lived and she loved.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you both so much for being here on The Blind Man in Black. I am your host, Brian Snyder, with your co-host, Rachel Snyder. You can find us on theblindmaninblack.com, YouTube, Apple Podcast, or if you're interested, you can see us being exhausted on TikTok on the Exhausting Snyders.
That's our silliness. TikTok and Instagram, the Exhausting Snyders.
Oh, I didn't remember Instagram. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gustavo, for being with us and having this conversation on the art of dying. It was wonderful. It was profound. And I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation soon.
Yes, of course. Good to see you, Rachel. Good to see you, Brian.
Wonderful to see you, Gustavo.
Muchos abrazos. Awkward ending. Here we go.
Awkward ending.